Okay, I'm going to make a video showing general how to respray a vehicle, various things I've learnt, and I've noticed there's a lot of videos out there. They cover one or two aspects, and then you've got to watch another video to get other aspects of it. So I'm going to try and cover a load of different aspects in one go for you. Okay, to start off with, preparing the surface you're going to respray. As I've been told by people in the past, particularly if you're using spray cans, it's better to spray an entire panel, such as this bumper for example. The entire thing has been prepped, or getting there. It's being prepped ready for respray. I have already resprayed this whole area all the way along here. You can see my reflection of the paint now, so there's your host in the paint, all the way through the car, right down to the front, the entire panel. I sprayed the entire panel. I've tried to do patches in the past, and it's very, very difficult to blend patches in. So if, say for example, this was the initial accident damaged area just here, that segment there where my hand is, that was the original accident damaged area. Now you can spray that, but it's difficult to blend newly painted areas in with the existing paintwork. Someone said to me, I've been told by 2 or 3 different people in the past through doing other projects, if you're going to spray a panel and you're using spray cans, as I was, you best off spraying the entire panel. It's too difficult to blend in with a spray can, trying to do one patch and blend in with the existing paintwork. So if you've got a spray gun, there are video tutorials which tell you how to increase the amount of filler, increase the amount of thinner gradually, and lower the amount of paint, coat after coat after. One coat you do a certain ratio, the next coat a different ratio, etc., and you work your way back from the area, and you can get a nice blend because you can mix the paint. But in a can, obviously you can't mix the paint, it comes out of the can as it is. If you try and do a patch, you're left with a lovely freshly painted area and then a ton of overspray, and you'll try and blend it in. I mean, obviously you're not going to sand all the new paintwork down, because it's, I suppose you can, but be too hard to bring it up with polishers, too awkward a job. I don't know the ins and outs of it, to be honest with you, but if you try and spray one patch, you'll end up with loads of overspray over the entire area, and it's a shit to try and blend in. You try and use rubbing compounds that companies sell, and you try and rub the paint off gradually, and it flakes away, flakes off the freshly painted area, because it won't stick to the freshly painted surface. It will peel off eventually. So yeah, just do the entire panel instead. The entire panel is a lot easier. Surface preparation, obviously you need to get rid of every bit of rust on there. If it's deep rust, in the past I've actually physically cut rust patches out of arches and things like that, but on this particular instance it was just surface rust. So I was able to, I kept sanding away. Start off with a really, really rough sandpaper, lowest grit you can find, to 40, 60, 80 or something like that. You can use a machine sander. If you do it by hand, it'll take you a bit longer, but you might get a better finish. Go over and get every bit of rust off there. Go right back to the bare metal. Don't use a grinder for it. As tempting as it is, you think, I'll take all the paint off using a grinder. You put a grinder to a surface, and you end up with, you go past the paint, past the primer underneath that paint, and then you go into the surface, and you actually bite away at the surface, and then you're left there, and you've got to use things like this. You've got to get the filler out, the delicate, this is knifing putty filler. This is really delicate, really light fill stuff. This is heavier, sorry, this is knifing putty as well, but there is heavier filler, there are heavier filler patches around. But yeah, you end up having to fill those afterwards, and it's a bit of a pig. So I wouldn't take a grinder to it, as tempting as it is. Just use a sander. If you're removing paint, then use a random orbital sander. Don't use a finishing sander, because it'll take forever. Have a look at the differences online, and it's worth spending. If you've already got a finishing sander and you think, well, I want to do the job as cheap as possible, just spend the money on a random orbital sander, and the paint will come off so much easier. So that's paint removal. You'll get an edge. Say for example, all this would have been damage, so you'll see an edge with the existing paintwork, the accent damage filler area, which you remove the filler, as much filler as you can. Then you'll have a nice fine, you'll have a fine line all the way along. It'll be filler. You'll have open panel, you'll have filler, then you'll have the primer, and then the paint, and then you'll have the shiny lacquer on top of the paint. You'll see each area as a little step up until you get to the fresh paint. So start off with really coarse sandpaper, then back it off, go to like 2000 grit sandpaper or something like that, and work the sandpaper over that edge. So it's get the sandpaper wet as well. Use wet and dry sandpaper for the final sand. Trying to blend in the edge as much as you possibly can with the open metal. You'll feel it start to go smooth. You'll feel it stepped, first of all. You'll feel a step between each surface, and then after a while you'll feel it smooth right out, and that should blend in then when you do the whole panel afterwards. If you've got to try and get it as straight as you possibly can, try and get the panel as straight as you possibly can. If it's got buckles, dents, etc. If it's got pits in it, try and knock all those out. Try and get it aligned. Compare the two panels. So compare this panel over here with a non-damaged panel, well, very minor damage panel. Then look at if you're straightening all the bodywork underneath, then try and get your lights lined up, for etc. For example. Just have a play around with it and really pay attention to how one side of the body is compared with the other side of the body underneath all the panels, like for example the bumper trim. Just get a hammer and a punch and knock it so it's straight before you try and do any body repair. Or if you don't, you'll find that stuff doesn't line up afterwards, and you'll have sprayed fresh paint onto a surface, and then you'll find out that you probably end up cracking the fresh paint trying to get stuff further lined up. So yeah, spend time getting it lined up first of all. You can then you can start doing the filling. You can buy filler. Have a bit of a look at different things to do with filling. Have a look at the different fillers you can buy, because there are some fillers which are really hard to apply, and they're a nightmare to work with. They take hardly any time to set. If it tells you to use a certain amount of hardener to the filler paste, then if you're finding that the filler is setting too hard, try backing off the hardener a little bit. For example, in some packets it will tell you a golf ball size hardener, sorry, a pea size hardener to a golf ball size paste. But then if you look further into the instructions, it will tell you 2 parts hardener to 100 parts paste. And I don't think the golf ball and the pea ratio is 100 to 2. I would have thought it's a bit different ratio to that. So try a slightly lower ratio. I think if you use 2 less amount of hardener, you'll have a chalky finish and it'll break up. So yeah, you can get some fillers which they're a lot easier to apply than other fillers. They spread on like butter instead of trying to build up a patch, and they'll flake off. Okay, I'll try not to waffle too much because I don't want to run out of time on a video. I don't want to have you waiting here for ages, but I've got a lot to cover. I'll try and help you out as much as I can in this video. So have a research into what fillers you can buy, and then try and get the area, use rough sandpaper, try and build the area up as good as you can initially after applying the filler. They'll say don't put the filler on too heavily above the surface you're trying to build up, but depends what filler you've got. I mean, the filler I had, it was difficult to apply, so I couldn't help but come up a good 4 or 5 millimeter over the surface. But I mean, as long as you haven't got the great big lumps sticking right out from the surface, it should be okay. It shouldn't take too long to sand. You can get easy sanding filler and things like that. This whole edge here was built up using filler. It took a fair while to do it, but persevered, and I got there in the end. So build the area up as much as you can, and then you'll find that you'll have loads of little tiny imperfections, and you'll try and fill those with filler. The trouble is, you try and fill those with filler, and you try and repeatedly fill those with filler, and you end up with more imperfections and more filler to sand off. You put a machine sander to it, and you find filler breaks off and things like that. It starts to crack. So when you're getting more nearer the shape that you want, then try just hand sanding it instead. Just hand sand it with a flat surface behind the sandpaper. Certain areas you could use your fingertips just to smooth out a raised area, for example. Yeah, try and get the shape as best you can. And then for the final finishing touches, you can get stuff called knifing putty, and that is ideal because you haven't got to mix it. It comes straight out of the tube, already mixed, and it will harden up gradually. It probably take to harden up, if you put a fair amount on it, it'll probably take about an hour or so to harden up properly, to properly cure. Knifing putty, you're not supposed to put it on any thicker than sort of 1mm or maybe 2mm, something like that. But don't go trying to build up an area which is 5, 6, 7mm deep with it, because it won't work. It'll just break up. It'll come away from the filler. So the minor imperfections, knifing putty is a job for that. Once you've got your knifing putty on there, now I put knifing putty on this. This is a perfect example. Now I've got things. I'll try and get it so it's coming in. I'm moving it closer, and it's going really blurry. So I'll try and do it at a distance. Well, I can't really do a lot about it. Okay, you've got knifing putty here. This is old knifing putty, which I've sanded away. This is a painted surface. Basically, somebody sprayed paint on top of shiny white paint, and it started to flake off as the time went on. And so I've had to remove all the paint. I've used a random orbital sander to remove the paint because it was taking ages by hand, taking a bit less time with a finishing sander, but still a month of Sundays. So I've used a random orbital sander to do it instead. And then I've sprayed to see what the initial surface is like, having got it as smooth as I could with wet and dry sandpaper. And then I've ended up, you see a load of imperfections. If you've got minor imperfections, then basically put this stuff on as thin as you can spread it out. For example, there, it's very poor quality, the video is on here, but it's on an iPhone. It's on very fine. I've only got it about 1 millimeter up from the initial bodywork. So put it on as thin as you can, and then leave it to set for a while. And then when it comes to sanding, get wet and dry sandpaper and go over it. Don't try and dry sand it, because if you try and dry sand it, what I found is you end up with scores in it. Don't use really coarse sandpaper either. Use something like a 800 grit, 600 grit, whatever. I'm just going to keep throwing tips at you here. When you go and pick up sandpaper from somewhere, if you could look on the packet, look at the packet for the sandpaper that you're buying, you're picking up, and it will tell you, it may tell you what grade of sandpaper they recommend for what job. Pay close attention to that, because if you use too fine a sandpaper or too coarse a sandpaper, you won't get the best results. You'll end up with scores in it, or it will take you forever to sand it down smooth, and you'll end up wasting a bit of sandpaper like there's no tomorrow, and you could have done it quicker with a more rough grade of sandpaper then. So yeah, look at the sandpaper, pay attention to what you're using, and then wet sand it, and you'll end up with a result like this. You'll end up with very nice, even, flat. When you run your finger over, it's nice and flat. You'll end up with that sort of a texture. You may even find that you go down to other coats of paint underneath. The yellow stuff on top of here is filler primer. If you look at areas like, well, you can see that, for example, it fills gaps. There's a gap there, there's gaps here. I put grey primer on to start off with, then I put filler primer on top of it, and it's filled the low spots. It's filled all the scratched areas. The filler primer has actually filled it, and it's done a pretty good job. And when you sand it away, you can see the areas that it's filled. So the filler primer is good. You can use that to build it up, and then I find it's easier if you've got paint on a surface to see where imperfections are. It's not always easy when you've got bare metal or bare plastic. Sometimes a bit of paint on a surface will show the imperfections up like there's no tomorrow. So no particular order of doing it. Some people might, there may be a particular order. Somebody might say there's a certain way you should do things in. I'm pretty much a novice when it comes to this. I'm learning things as I'm going along, doing this car repair job. So if you feel free to tell me if you disagree with something. Try and be constructive in your comments. I don't want a load of abuse. Like, I don't want an internet troll coming onto the video, because nobody likes those at the end of the day, really. Yeah, so you can blend it in, and you run your finger over it, and it's a really smooth surface you get at the end of the day. Try and get the surface as best you can. I ran out of time with this surface here. I don't know if, let's see